All right, so we're back doing the second video for kind of putting materials in, right? We kind of did the first one where we kind of really just did the room, right? We kind of explored tiling, textures. That was the first video. The nice thing is that's actually basically the same process. It's just that we'll plug in some bump maps now, and we'll plug in some incandescent maps, right? We'll kind of plug in at least a couple of other map types. So we'll put some preset materials on. So basically at this point, and we'll do the preset videos, the preset materials on the next video because we really have to kind of see the rendering to see those. So this one's really just going to be about getting all of the textures properly plugged in on all the stuff. And then if a couple of the other ones, we'll do some materials and some quick lighting and rendering. It's just that we need to have Arnold's render view up, and we're not really going to do that in this video. So remember, 4 is of course wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 on your keyboard, right? 6 on your keyboard will show textures. So in this case, let's kind of focus maybe on the desk here. So I'll zoom in a little bit, and I'll grab this desktop, right? And I always kind of look up here to make sure that we see kind of the Arnold menu, right there. That's for your Arnold rendering stuff. The next video we'll have that. We'll kind of talk about that and show that stuff. So Arnold. If you don't see that, remember you might need to go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. And then just scroll down, because certain things in my are plugins, to the M2A, right? It's the solid angle section, M2A, and make sure that's loaded and auto-loaded, right? And that just makes sure that Arnold's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the right mouse button over the object, right? So we select the object, in this case the desktop. We hold down right mouse button over it, right? Because when we hold down right mouse button over stuff, right, it brings up our selection types: vertex, edge, face, object mode. We've been doing that plenty. We even saw in the last video that if you go to UV, there's that UV shell menu, right? So keep in mind that if you hold down right mouse button, of course you get all of these, right? But you also get this other menu here. And sometimes you'll see yours be a little smaller. It's larger because the name for this object is huge. So that's why the actual menu is wider than it normally would be. So keep that in mind, is that depending on the length of the name of the object, you might actually see the menu be wider here. But it's just holding down right mouse button like normal, right? You hold down right mouse button over an object you selected, and it gives you your selection types. But it also gives you these. And towards the bottom, there is Assign New Material, right? So we assign new material, and that brings up this, right? We saw this in the last video, and I'm going to do it a couple more times today, so you're going to see it plenty, right? Now, these are kind of some of the default My materials that it comes with. And they're kind of the old-fashioned ones that are really meant to work with a renderer soft Mental that's not even doesn't even exist anymore. It's actually gone. It's dead basically. And Maya's own software renderer. And Maya's software renderer is really not terribly good. So we use Arnold nowadays, right? So we click on the little Arnold filter, right? Because there's this little kind of menu on the side here, and we click on Arnold, and that brings up the Arnold material. So this is kind of like a filter. And there's our Arnold materials. We can really ignore pretty much almost all of these this semester, but later on you'll see things like ambient occlusion and the upper division modeling courses, car paint, wireframe for wireframe renders. That's just something we don't really have to worry about for this class. So we see that there's the standard surface one. It's kind of about 2/3 down, AI standard surface. So we click on that. And what it does is it actually creates that material on there. And you see how kind of it's no longer, it's a little bit lighter color. It's kind of more of a white than a gray. So that's how you can apply that material. Now at this point we want to actually get access to the material properties, right? So that's where it's great, instead of using Channelbox Layer Editor on the side here or Modeling Toolkit, it's good to go to Attribute Editor, right? And remember, the tabs are here, but also there are buttons right up here as well. So you see how that's Modeling Toolkit, that's Channelbox Layer Editor, that one's Attribute Editor. So there's our Attribute Editor. Now, you'll actually see in here there's these little tabs up the top, and you can kind of scroll through them to kind of go to the AI standard surface. But also, if you just hold down your right mouse button over your object again, right? So over the object you want to work with, hold down right mouse button, brings up your selection types. We don't want to assign new material because we already did that. But right above assign new material is material attributes. And what that'll do is that'll bring up the material also. Now in this case, we'll label it, call it desktop, something like that. There we go. And we can see that we have these two sections already open for us, the base section and the specular section. And we kind of saw those a little bit on the last video. Now, specular means shiny, and we really aren't doing that much with shininess. We probably want a little bit of shininess on this because it is going to be a desk, and desks have a little bit of shininess, but we want it to be low. So what I'll do is in the specular section, the weight is the amount. So if I just select the slider, I can kind of turn that down to be pretty low. We also don't want the specular to be too shiny, so what we can do is we can make it rougher, right? And that'll kind of spread the shininess over the surface more, so it'll look a little more like a matte, right? Low roughness is for things that are highly reflective, like a mirror or glass, things like that. But there's lots of like plastics and woods that you kind of see have some shininess, but it's not super reflective. So turning up the roughness kind of helps to make the roughness or the shininess more muted, right? Less reflective and more just kind of that little kind of highlight you see on the surface. So we'll often be using some roughness with stuff and maybe a low specular. All right, that'll give us some of those controls. All right, so with that, we've got that specular adjusted. Now remember, we only painted color maps for the desks and the end table. So in this case, I just was kind of playing around with some specular controls to adjust them. And remember how in the last video I told you that we could actually play with the properties of a material without a texture? We can do that, right? I made the specular less intense. I made it kind of rougher so that the specularity, kind of the shininess, right? Specular means shiny, is less reflective and a little bit more matte, right? You can actually control these just through sliders and even picking a color. You don't have to plug a texture. Now in this case, we do have a color map, right? So the base section is where you plug your colors into, right? Base. And there's a color area, and we click on the checkerboard. And then it brings up this, and you see this is very similar to our material one. You have filters on the side here, and then the actual textures. Now, most of these you can ignore. They're the procedural textures that Maya provides you with. Many of these are actually just kind of math-based textures, algorithms. That's why they're procedural, right? You just turn on, you create it, and you can just play with some sliders to give you different interesting effects: noise, leather, water. And sometimes like the leather one never really looks that convincingly like leather. So they can be cool, but sometimes they're also like a bit CG-ish. And we're just not doing really anything with procedural textures this semester. So we want to kind of use the fourth one down called File, right? Fourth one down, File. So we click on that. And what that does, it brings us to this, right? Now, we saw in the last video that there's place 2D textures, how you can tile it. That was really only for the wallpaper and the floors, right? And we actually used the UV method anyways. We selected UV shells, scaled them up, made them bigger to tile it. Here we don't want to tile it. We painted a texture to match exactly these UVs. So in this case, we don't have to even worry about that one. We just go to the folder, right here, and that's going to allow us to browse. Now in this case, like I said, by default, it kind of tends to go to source images for your project. So I'll kind of go back up to the images because that's where I exported all my textures out to, right? So you can already see my project set and everything. So what I want to do is find the desk, probably the desk drawers. I call it desktop, but it's the desk drawers. So we'll hit open. And actually that's not that one. Let me see. It might have been... must have been... Oh, okay, let's see. Desk legs, actually. There we go. Desk legs. So we'll hit open. And there we go. And you see how that texture matches, right? Because if we go to UV editing really quickly here, right? And we click on this, you can see that that texture that we painted in Mudbox, right? We were painting it with these UVs. These were the UVs that when we sent this object over to Mudbox, it had those UVs. Those UVs were in Mudbox. So when we went and painted the texture, it was painting it based on these UVs. And these are still the same UVs on this object. So that texture matches. And you can also really fully appreciate the textures are really just two-dimensional pictures, right? That's why we UV unwrap these so that the two-dimensional image will lay on the surface properly. So I'm going to just click back on my workspace, go to Maya Classic, and that's good for that one, right? So I'm going to click on this one, right, because that's our other part, and I'm going to hold down right mouse button over it, and I'm going to go Assign New Material, and we'll click on Arnold. We'll do AI Standard Surface, and of course we want this to be a similar specular area, so we bring that weight down to, I think, in the 2s. Bring that roughness up into like 3 or 4. It doesn't really matter too much if you're a little off from these numbers. Just get it close, right? But that just makes it the shininess more subtle, right? It'll be there, but it won't be super pronounced or highly reflective. And it'll mimic kind of the wood you'll see on most desks better. But it also just highlights that we can actually control properties like specular, which is shininess, just through the sliders it gives you, right? You can plug a texture into all of these to control it with the texture, but you can also just play with sliders to get it, all right? textures, like we said before, just give us that pixel level control. So of course the base section color checkerboard, right? Click on that checkerboard, brings this up, file, and then we can go to folder, and then we find the desk drawers. Hit open, and there we go. And now we can see the textures are on. I just saved it, right? Control S for save. Now the textures are on that desk. Now, like I said, we're going to come back in the next video to do like the metals and underneath the chair. So we'll save that for the next video. We're just going to plug in, create materials for all the ones that have actual textures. So I'm just going to rotate my camera around, Alt left to rotate it. Select this. Remember, F is frame selection, right? F is frame selection. And I want to start to apply my textures for the end table, right? So in this case, I've already got the drawer selected, so I'll just hold down right mouse button over it. Right, so you select it, left click on it, hold down right mouse button. We're not selecting anything, so it's object mode is fine. We just go to assign new material, right? So it's way down here, assign new material. It brings this up, which at this point you've already seen a couple times now, right? Guess what? The rest of the video, that's what I'm going to be doing. It's going to be boring, but it's going to be great reinforcement. You don't have to keep rewinding the video, although you can, to see it, because I'm going to keep doing it. So we just click on Arnold to filter down to the Arnold materials. And we click on the AI standard surface, right? The AI standard surface one. There we go. And we can give that a name. Call it drawers, end table drawers. Technically, you don't have to label these, but it can make it easier to kind of know which one is which, right? So, end table drawers. And once again, we'll kind of, bring down the kind of, there we go. We'll just bring down the specular weight and bring up the roughness, because we want this to be kind of similar to the desk. So specular section, we're just not plugging maps in, even though you could, right? You could technically paint a spec map in Mudbox, right? It has map types for specular and roughness. You saw those were options there, and we picked different map types. And you would actually plug those into, the color and the roughness sections. Usually, though, to get it to pop and show up more, you have to bring up the index of refraction a little bit. That's the IOR. But we were really just playing with some basic specular controls here. But you can paint maps for that stuff. So I just want to bring the weight down for specular and the roughness up a little bit. We go to base color, checkerboard. Of course, it brings this up. We don't really have to filter it. We just click on File. It's the fourth one down, File. Folder. And then, of course, we can go find end table. That should be drawers. There we go. Hit Open. And you see how those lay on properly. We'll grab the tabletop ones. Hold down right mouse button. Assign new material. Now you'll notice I'm assigning a new material to each object, right? So whatever is a separate object should get its own material because it's got its own unique texture based on its own unique UVs, and it should have its own material, right? So I'll go to Arnold, AI standard surface, there we go. And then of course, once again, we can bring that specular weight down, right? So specular section, bring that down to kind of the lower 2s or so. Bring up roughness a little bit. There we go. You're not going to see it that well in the real-time viewport Maya, because Maya's real-time viewport just is really not that good, right? So keep that in mind. Let's call this end table top. There we go. And of course, the base area, color, is where we plug the actual color mapping. So the color section of your base is where your color maps go, your diffuse maps. And the checkerboards are how you plug a texture in, right? So wherever you see a checkerboard, you can plug a texture in. And of course it brings this up. And we want File, right? So we click on the fourth one down, File. Click on the folder, right? It's got that little gray folder. And this should be end table top. There we go. Hit Open. There we go. You see how it matches up pretty well. And then of course we'll grab the legs. Hold down right mouse button, assign new material, click on the Arnold filter, AI standard surface, all this end table legs. There we go. And of course we'll bring down the specular weight kind of into the 2s, bring the roughness into 3 or 4s. Remember, you're not going to see it that well in the viewport. When you do the rendering later on, you'll see this stuff looks more realistic. Base color, checkerboard, File, there we go, folder, there we go, and then of course end table legs. And there we go. And now all of our textures are created for the, or plugged into Maya for the end table. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the clock. So I'm going to click on the clock since it's already right here. Or we can hit F just to see a little closer. Now in this case, since I'm using my clock, it's just one object, it makes it a little easier. We hold down right mouse button. We go to assign new material because it's its own separate object with its own separate UVs and its own separate textures. Material attributes, right? It brings this up. Arnold. AI standard surface, right? There we go. We'll call this clock. There we go. Now in this case, we probably want a little bit of shininess, but once again, it'll be like more of a matte, so I'll kind of bring that down similar to what we were doing before. Kind of weight in the 2s, roughness kind of up a little bit. Of course, there's a color. So we go to base color checkerboard, file. Of course, it brings this up, folder. And then, of course, we can find the clock color. There we go. And there's our clock color. Now, in this case, though, we have other map types we want to plug in, right? So I'm going to click back on that clock, hold down right mouse button, go to material attributes, right? Because we already assigned the new material. I want to actually go to the attributes for the already assigned material. And so it brings it up, and you can see that there's the clock name, the color's already plugged in, there's the specular controls. Now, this is where it gets a little more interesting and where we're going to start to use more of just base and specular, because this has a glow map and a bump map, right? So you'll notice, besides base and specular, there's a lot of other properties down here. So I'm going to scroll down, and you'll see that there is an area called emission, right? Emission. So I'm going to open that up, right? Click on that little triangle that opens it up. Now, for the glow map, you actually want to plug it into both of these, right? Because it's going to control not only the amount, but actually the color as well. So we'll click on the weight checkerboard. And of course it brings this up. We click on File. We'll go to the folder. And we'll find our clock glow. There it is. Plug that in. I'm going to click back on it. Hold down right mouse button, material attributes. And now I'm going to plug, see how the emission's kind of is already down there. Emission's already open. Click on the checkerboard for color. File, folder, and we're actually going to plug that same map in, right? Because we only painted one map for it, it's going to control both properties. And there we go. And now we have more of a proper glow. So I can click back on the object, hold down right mouse button, material attributes, and you see how both are plugged in there. So you can actually use the same map in different channels, right? So you can actually plug in the same map to several channels if you want to, right? Now the last thing we want to do is a little bit below emission, because this is just, you scroll down from here, there's an area called geometry, right? And you'll see, once we open up geometry, there's a bump mapping area. And we can click on the checkerboard for bump mapping. It brings up this, so kind of all the same process again, file. Now this is where it gets a little different, because bump maps are a little bit different, right? They actually have depressed values, raised values, neutral values. You can actually control the intensity of the bump map inside of Maya independent of the map itself. That's what bump depth does, right? So I'm going to leave it at its default right now. I might even maybe turn it up a little bit. Actually, let's leave it by default. We can always come back and tweak that on the next video. So we leave bump depth alone because we want to be able to maybe play with the slider to turn it up and down. What I want to do is I want to plug the bump map into the bump value one, right? The one that's kind of already yellow and it's got this kind of little black triangle thing. Whenever you see kind of black triangle like this, that means a texture is actually already plugged in. So I can click on that, and now it takes us to our folder one, right? It takes us to this with our folder. So we'll click on the folder, and we'll go to clock bump, and there we go. And now you can actually see some bumpiness in here. Now, this might be more pronounced here than it is in the render. So usually we kind of plug stuff in to make sure it's all plugged in the right spot, and then we come back and we tinker with some of the properties a little later on. All right, so now we've got the clock. Since we're already over here, we might as well do our bed. So we'll go to the legs. Remember, the rails we're going to do as a separate material. We didn't unwrap those. The only thing we unwrapped was the bedposts, the pillows, and the blanket. So I'm going to click on the bedposts, hold down right mouse button, assign new material. I'm going to click on the Arnold filter, so it filters down to Arnold. AI standard surface. There we go. Now I'm going to scroll up because we really only had a color map for this one. So we'll go scroll back up, right? There's a slider here, but the scroll wheel will also do this. And we're going to treat this like our other woods. We're going to bring the weight down lower, bring up the roughness a little bit for specular, because that's shininess, right? And we're going to go back to our base section color, checkerboard. Click on File, Folder, and then of course we can plug in the, let's see, where is it? Bedpost color, there we go. And there we go. Now we're going to put our own little material, brass material on these as well, but we'll deal with that later. So now we're going to click on the blanket, hold down right mouse button, assign new material, because it's its own object with its own UVs and its own texture repainted. We click on Arnold, AI standard surface. Now in this case, this is fabric, so I'm going to turn that specular weight down to 0, right? So if you want no shininess at all, just turn that weight to 0, and then there will be no shininess, right? So blankets are often cloth, and you're not going to have shininess on a lot of cloths. And of course, we can go to Base Color, Checkerboard, File, Folder, and we'll find the bed blanket color, right? Open that up. There we go. Click back on the blanket, hold down right mouse button, Material Attributes, and we're going to scroll down because we did have a bump map for this, right? So we'll go to the Geometry section, right? We've opened it up, Geometry, Bump Mapping, Checkerboard, File, and of course what we do is we plug it into the bump value, right? It does take us to this intervening node because we can come back and we can always adjust this bump depth later on. So I'm going to go to the bump value one, the one with the black triangle, Folder, Blanket Bump, there we go, and there's our bumpiness. And it might be quite pronounced here, that's okay. It doesn't really matter what it looks like in the viewport, it matters what it's going to look like in the render later on. And then of course we're going to go to the pillows, hold down right mouse button, assign new material, click on Arnold here, so that brings up this AI standard surface. We'll scroll up. Now those are once again fabric, so I'll turn that weight down to 0 for specular. And in the base color, I'll click on checkerboard. And then we can do File, of course, Folder, and then of course we can find bed pillow color. There we go. I'll click back on the pillow, hold down right mouse button, Material Attributes, right? I don't want to assign a new material. You can plug multiple textures into the same material for all the different channels. So we'll go Material Attributes. We'll scroll down to the geometry area, right? Remember, the base and specular at the top, you can just scroll down with the slide bar or your scroll wheel. In this case, we can just close the mission up because we don't have any other things with glows. That was only the clock radio. But we do have some other stuff with bump maps. So the geometry section is where your bump mapping's at. So we click on the checkerboard for bump mapping, File, and of course we plug into the bump value, not the bump depth. The one that's got the black triangle. We click on that. Folder, and then of course bed pillow bump. And there we go. And now we've got those all plugged in. And so now we're really just down to the chair, right? Just the chair top. So I'm going to click on the chair top. Remember, F for frame selection. Now in this case, remember, I kept this as one object with one UV set. If you did them as kind of all separate objects, remember, they should have all their own textures. So I'm going to click on that. Hold down right mouse button. So it brings up our selection types. We go to Assign New Material. We click on Arnold. Right, the little Arnold filter on the side here. AI Standard Surface. We'll scroll back up. Now in this case, we do probably want a little bit of specularity, but we'll keep it really kind of low level and roughness because we didn't really paint a spec map for this. So we'll keep it kind of pretty low level so we don't get a lot. There we go. And in this case, our fabric will have a little bit of shininess. So we go to Base Color Checkerboard, right? File, Folder, and we could find, where are we at? Chair color. There we go. Open. And there's our chair color. I'm going to click back on it, hold down right mouse button, and this time we go to Material Attributes, right? Because we already assigned the material. We plugged our color in, right? And we turned our specular down a lot, maybe brought some roughness up. And of course we scroll down, call this chair also. I haven't been naming these correctly all the time, but chair. And we go to that geometry section, right? We scroll down to the geometry area, bump mapping. We click on checkerboard, File, and of course it brings us to this one, bump value, right? This is actually where you can plug normal maps in also. If you have normal maps from for video games, use as, and you can use it to use tangent space normals. but we're using bumps, so we're fine. Bump value, click on the black triangle one, folder, and then we find chair bump. And there we go. Now you can actually see the bumpiness from this. Now, like I said, it might be quite pronounced in the viewport. That's okay, right? We're not worried about that right now. So now every material that had textures is on all of our models. I want to save that. It's going to be a great place to kind of stop this video.